You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hey, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we're going to take a journey into the nonprofit world. So if you are doing some of that work, whether on a volunteer basis or in leadership there, or have been thinking about making a commitment and going there, this show can probably help you round that out. But as I was telling my guests in the green room, leadership exists everywhere, and the nonprofit world is certainly no exception in the hunger and need for good leadership. My guest today is a gentleman named Matt George, and Matt, welcome to the show.
Oh, I appreciate it, Doug. I love your show.
Tell us a little bit so everybody kind of understands where you're coming from. Talk a little bit about your journey, kind of your experience adulting.
Yeah, well, I've been in the nonprofit world really my whole life. I've been a 30-year CEO in that world, and I stepped down a couple years ago to pursue some other things, but I still have my hand in it. And it started at a young age. It started at age 16. I had a friend pass away from cancer, and I really didn't know how to act or react to that. The family, they didn't have a ton of money, and here you've got you lose your son, and then now you have to pay for a funeral. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to raise some money, and ended up raising $3,500 by using sports. I was a tennis player, and I thought, wow, that when I handed the check over to the family, it was emotional. It felt like something I've never felt before. Number one. Number two, it felt like $1 million. And the look on their face and the appreciation said it all. And little did I know that was going to be the beginning of my leadership journey in nonprofit world for the rest of my life.
Fascinating. Just curious, not to get too far off track, but so you said you relied on tennis. How did that work? What did you offer? What did you do? And
yeah, so there was a world record in tennis of 124 straight hours of doubles tennis, and there's rules to it. So there's some time breaks you can take and so on. So you could take a 5-minute break every hour, but you could accumulate those times. And so I went for the world record at age 16. I played 52 hours. And then my mind went crazy. I started hallucinating but I was driven, actually. It drove me to think, all right, I'm going to be able to do this. So I raised $3,500 then, and then a couple years after that, and this was before Google and cell phones and everything else. But a couple years after that, I was talking to a tennis psychologist, actually Jim Lehrer was his name, and a famous man. And he had said, probably the best time to do something like this is age 19, 20, 21, in that range. So in college, I attempted to do it again, and I actually broke the record. And so ended up raising $30-some thousand during that time. But that actually kind of put me on the map, so to speak, with, I got congratulation calls from Hulk Hogan and tennis stars and so on, and a lot of media, a lot of paper and newspaper. And, again, back then wasn't on the internet. So pretty cool stuff, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. And it's interesting how those unique offerings can be great catalysts for raising good sums of money for great causes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you kind of, I'm please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming there's a little bit of a notion of rising the ranks in the nonprofit world. What was that journey about for you, and how long did it take before you took the helm, maybe as a director? Or...
The crazy story with that is I was never not a CEO.
Oh, okay.
And so I have a whole speech I give on that about leadership. And what happened was my cousin was a NFL football player, Jeff George. He was a quarterback, and ended up we were roommates in college, and I used athletes and leveraged the pull of athletes to raise money. And when he went to the NFL in 1990, I started his foundation. So I became the CEO of his foundation, and then after 10 years doing that, took over a boys' home, which was very interesting. Reorganized what back in the day used to be called an orphanage, but now the residential facility, and then I did a lot of merging of nonprofits, and I ended my career with what was kind of a full circle moment back in at the boys' home. I merged. It was called Youth Farm into Children's Home, and then I eventually became the CEO of the Children's Home. And so it was, to me, it was meant to be, and it was special. But as I stepped down 2 years ago as CEO, my joke kind of is that I never reported to anybody other than a volunteer, because I always reported to the board. And so I had to actually find, and I didn't realize it until age 30, but I actually had to find how I was going to improve as a leader and as a CEO. And I had to find creative ways to do that. And I did that by utilizing my board, and I did that by mentors.
Yeah. Yeah. As most of my listeners know, I am a big fan of mentorship.
Yeah.
And I'll share a tidbit. I was just reading an article yesterday, and I don't recall who put it out there, but there's an infographic on LinkedIn about the different generational impacts in the workplace. And according to this chart, the millennials and the Gen Zs don't like mentors. And I thought, how sad.
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna push back on that a little, Doug.
Okay, please.
I know what I know I've read the same stuff. I don't believe it, because I know a lot of young people getting into business, male and female, and they come up to me all the time in the group that I work with. I work with Kevin Harrington, who's the original shark on Shark Tank, and my other partner, Brandon T. Adams, and we talk about mentorship weekly. I mean, we talk about, and so I was just in an airport a couple days ago, and I was talking to a young gentleman. He was probably 28 years old, and as we started talking, he was asking about my being a business coach at Harvard Business School. He was what came up was, he asked the question, how do I find a mentor? Because my friends and I don't know how to ask or how to get a mentor. And I said, I appreciate you asking that question, because that's actually a brilliant question. And the answer to it is, you have to just ask. You have to figure out where you're weak, where your own personal pain points are, and find people in spaces that have the experience to be able to lift and prop you up, and to be there for you. And you know this, Doug, you talk about it in other shows all the time, but with your mentorship, that, mentorship to me was the pivotal moment in making me going from an average leader to a very good leader. And it wasn't anything I did other than just listen and ride people's coattails on their success, and learn and fail at the same time.
I agree with you, and I do tend to believe that, contrary to what this infographic said, I don't think it's that they don't want it. I do think it's that issue that you brought up. They don't know how to ask for it.
I agree.
And to your point, as you were talking, it clicked with me. I alluded in the green room. I too preside over a nonprofit that is designed to create some scholarship money for a certain group of college students. And every time we meet with those students, they're hungry for mentorship.
I agree.
And they love the fact that we as a nonprofit organization just show up and have, really candid, open discussions with them. And we did a program last year in the spring semester. We did a 4 hour, it was a 2 session, total 4 hour event. And we were talking about leadership and sharing practical real world experiences with them. And when it was over, the feedback we got, they said, no disrespect to anybody, but what we got in these last 4 hours is better than anything we've had from the campus our whole career.
I love that. I love it. And it's not surprising.
And we said, great, thumbs up. We know we're hitting. And the beauty of it was for those of us that are a little longer in the tooth, it was just very natural. And it was common sense. We just wanted to sit down, have an open discussion, no big agenda, no big slide deck, nothing like that going on. It was just an honest discussion and answered questions as we went.
Yeah, I have 5 kids, but my 3 oldest daughters are 30, 28, and 25. And my 30 and 28-year-old, they're always asking questions. They're always asking, who do you know, Dad, that can advise on this? And maybe they were brought up that way because they saw what I did, but at the same time, their friends are craving information. So I see it, and I don't buy into any of that garbage. I actually think that's kind of the negative rhetoric that flows through the threads of media, which I don't buy into.
Well, I don't want to get off our topic, but listeners have heard me say this before. I have an article that I read sometimes when I've been called in to talk to companies about generations in the workforce and the struggle and all. And I read this thing and I say, who do you think wrote that? And of course, they all say, well, that sounds like a millennial manifesto. It's like, I don't trust the people above me and blah, 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 and it goes on, very contrarian. Well, the author was Henry David Thoreau, and it was written in 1863.
I love that.
So, trick question, but the point is, and the point I make, I tell people, guys, this is not new. None of this is new. There's nothing unique and different. Do they have access to different technology? Sure. But did we have different technology from our parents? Sure, we did. I mean, we had cassette tapes. Woo,
Right. I love that.
So I do think it's about, and maybe that's the message for leaders out there, is you can help by opening the door and opening the discussion. If the younger folk are seemingly reluctant to engage, don't assume that means they're not interested, but quite the contrary.
Yeah, and it's tough to go up to somebody that's a leader or a pillar in a community and ask them to help you. Because what I was talking to this young gentleman about a couple days ago, he didn't even know what he was asking for. He knew he needed help, but he didn't know how to ask. And so we kind of did in the airport, we kind of did a role play. I go, ask me. And he very, sheepishly, he said, would you be my mentor? And I said, no. I said, that's not how you ask. Here's how we're going to do it. I said, let's talk about what your goals are, what you want. What are your strengths? Utilize your strengths, but also be aware of your weaknesses and your pain points and areas to improve, whatever you want to call them. But to me, they're weaknesses. And so let's look at your weaknesses and then find somebody in your community or find somebody through LinkedIn or whatever it may be. Find somebody like a Doug Thorpe to be able to sit there and go to them in an educated way and make an ask. And if you go into that way, you've had this happen to you, somebody come and make an ask to you. And if it's sincere and they really want to get better, I really find it hard to believe that people are going to say, no, I don't have time. They'll figure out something, right? And
I agree.
I think that's the message here to people young in the business.
Well, and similar to that point, what I coach people about doing if they are interested in going that way, when there is a leader in the community or at your work or wherever that you respect for a certain attribute, maybe you observe them, they are dynamic communicators, they've got great recall of names and little nebulous facts that help engage people. And that's a gift, that's a skill, so if that's something you're hungry to learn, be specific when you ask. Don't just say, "Can you be my mentor?" But say, "I've observed you doing X, Y, and Z, and I really want to pack that into my tool bag of leadership and influence. And
Yeah,
would you work with me and help me understand how you got to be that way?"
exactly. Exactly.
And I agree with you. Seldom is the person that's ever said no. And you may have heard on prior episodes the story I tell. I learned about mentorship at a very young age, being an only child of a single mom, and she had the wisdom to surround me with mentors. She
Yeah.
went out and did the recruiting and said, "Hey, I got this kid. Could you work with him?" And I had a great long list of mentors over the years, and it rotated, it changed, and we refined it and we went different directions. But I got used to asking. So when I packed up and went to college, guess what? First couple of things I did was identify some people on the
Yeah.
campus that I needed to hook up with and gravitate to. And I'll never, ever regret the time and opportunity. And they were all gracious, they were all wonderful. And to your point, fully willing to say yes. And sometimes it was not exactly right now, but I'll let me
Yeah.
think about it. I'll work it out. Yes, we're going to do this.
Yeah. One of my mentors is Doug Oberhelman, and he's the former CEO of Caterpillar.
Mhm.
And I asked him this question. I mean, first of all, when I asked him originally, he said, why do you want me to be? And I have an answer for that. And I said, I see you make decisions quickly. I know you're protecting a brand. And so I gave him three or four reasons, but I asked
Exactly.
him, I said, what if somebody came up to you and they genuinely wanted to get better? And he said, it happens all the time, Matt. And I always say yes. And he said, it doesn't mean that I'm personally going to do everything, but what it does mean is had, they broke through their nerves or anxiety of asking me. And I understand, that's cool. And once they do that, then it's my job to sit here and find them the right person. And so I've done that many times, is what he told me. And I thought that was a very cool answer.
That is, and I think that captures the essence. Those that have become good, effective leaders and have the capacity to be valuable mentors, they know they
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 know.
they have a sense of it. And when they get asked, they kind of almost automatically go into, "Yeah, I'm going to pay it back. Somebody
Yeah.
did this for me
Right.
somewhere, and now is my chance. You're asking, now's my chance. I
That's
can
right.
I can give back." So that's the dynamic and the economy that goes with all of that. So for those of you who are listening that may be thinking about mentorship and have been afraid to ask or don't know how to ask, the fundamental message is just ask.
Well,
Just go
Doug,
ahead.
I mean, this, just to tell you how crazy this is 7 years ago, I asked Kevin Harrington, and he's the inventor of the infomercial, and he's had 1,000 products and as seen on TV and original shark on Shark Tank, and the list goes on. I saw him speak. I met him. I asked to talk to him. He said, "What do you want?" He said, "I'll call you back. I'll call you back in 2 hours. I'm gonna hit up. I got to get on my plane." And I'm like, he isn't going to call me back. And I'm still at this conference. And 2 hours later, he calls me back. And he had done a little background check on me. He knew all about me. And he said, "Well, what do you want?" And I said, "I've never had a mentor that is into branding like you are. Like, it is really strong, in your face, like tough, and it's fun. Would you mentor me?" And he said, "Are you serious about it?" And I said, "Yes." And I introduced myself as a CEO of a children's home in Peoria, Illinois. That's how I introduced myself. And he said, "Be down in Florida on this date at this time. Come to this address if you're serious. And if you're not, it was nice meeting you." And I flew down there. I knock on the door. It happened to be his home, and he let me in. And 20 minutes later, I had my first book deal. He called somebody. He said, "You're going to write a book." I started that 2 weeks later. I started writing my first book called Nonprofit Game Plan. He has mentored me ever since. And to tell you how important this ask was, I'm now partners with him in our business. And so that's only 7 years of, but it's 7 years of trust and respect. And that's what can come out of mentorship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that all started how?
I saw him speak. I didn't even know him. And I
Yeah.
saw him speak at a conference. And after the conference, I tracked him down and I caught him leaving the building, kind of trying to sneak out the back. And in my first book, he wrote that in the foreword of how we met. He said he tracked me, that Matt George tracked me down. But my point in all this is not that it's a fun story, is that a persistent ask can get you what you need. You just have to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that advice, and that is a great story. And it, I think the other thing that strikes me as you're telling that, I think there's this perception of who you go after, and what it takes. I know a gentleman who has developed something he calls the YOS. Simon Sinek made famous the concept of know your why.
Yep.
Well, this Dr. Gary Sanchez, he's actually a dentist, Dr. DDS. He heard that talk, and he was at a station in life with his dental practice. He knew there was more. He just was doing that mind check and life check on where am I going, what am I doing, and he was asking those questions. So the way he tells the story, he started stalking Simon Sinek. He said, "I heard your talk. I need to talk to you." And he said it took a while. It took almost a year, but Simon finally replied, called him, and said, "Why are you chasing me? What do you want to talk about?" And he asked the question. He said, "Well, great talk. Know your why. Do you have an assessment tool? Do you have something that helps people do that?" And at that point in time, Simon said, "No, unfortunately, I don't. What do you got in mind?" And so they began a discussion, and Gary went out with his own resources. He did some manual surveying of ultimately what worked out to be 40,000 respondents.
Wow.
And put all the data together and discovered that in all of humanity, there are fundamentally only 9 whys. The real core question of why, there's only 9 of them. But there's a dynamic of how you score through this process, and the iterations of the 9 whys, you're going to score out in his assessment, and it'll pick the top 3 out of the 9 that are yours. But the way it ranks them, number 1 is your why, number 2 is your how, and number 3 is your what. Or what and how. I'm sorry, I got them reversed. Why, what, and how. And it's fascinating work, and you can do this assessment online. And now I know Simon's gone on and he's done some parallel work in that space, and has all that going on. But
that's a great story. But that just shows, that's just persistence. And resilience, I guess, is another good word there.
Right. And I think it comes down to the individual personal conviction, and something maybe we ought to layer in here with this, and I talk about this a lot as well, is the notion of, I encourage leaders to try to create a personal vision of where you're going and what you're doing, or maybe said better, how do you want to show up? And you kind of alluded to it. You talked about wanting to be a better CEO for the organizations you were leading. So that was work on the question, how do I really want to
Yeah.
show up? And without the personal vision work of making a declaration of, I want my leadership to be about X, Y, and Z, and it can be different for everybody, but if you haven't done that work, you really don't have a foundation.
That's right.
And the way I like to describe it is if you've got the foundation, then as you show up, the curveballs that business and life are going to throw at you, you are more prepared to respond rather than react in those moments.
Yeah. And I love that, but it's also, you have to be very intentional in wanting to get better. Like
Right.
it's almost like I had a mentor tell me you have to have a MAP plan. What is the MAP plan? And then you have to stick to it. And so I've told this story a few times, but I had a mentor say to me, they push you on different things. And so like over a 10-year period, believe it or not, I did a SWOT analysis on myself every quarter. So over a 10-year period, I had 40 different analysis, and it showed and the data showed where I changed, where I was getting better. And so another exercise I like is, what are your top 10 qualities that you have? What are you great at in business? And I would always say, speech and fundraising and speaking and whatever it is. And my mentor said, let's look at 8, 9, and 10. And 8, 9, and 10 are this. So why are you going to this conference? It's a fundraising conference when you already know how to fundraise. He said, you're wasting your time. He said, you could write that whole curriculum if you wanted to. So I really started focusing I spent 18 months gearing up and focusing, just studying HR. And then another thing that I did that I thought I look back and was probably one of the smarter things that I did, was I took our financials, and they're public knowledge, and I told my board chair what I was doing. But I took our financials, and we were a big company. We were a $30 million plus company annually, and 500 employees and 54 programs. It was a big size business. And I went to the president of PNC Bank and the other bank, and then the third bank, and then Morgan Stanley. And I went to 5 different people, and I sat down with them, and I handed them a copy, and I handed them a highlighter. And I said, as a board member, what do you look at on these financials? Because I want to get better in reading these financials and applying them to the business. I don't want to get caught in a board meeting not knowing an answer. And so I was constantly trying to figure out how to get better and smarter, and not just reading books. There's unique ways that you can do it if you apply yourself and make it intentional. I think that's what you're alluding to.
Yeah. Great advice, great experience, and great counsel there. It is so important. And I love what you said. Your one mentor coach said to you, 8, 9, and 10, you've already mastered this one thing. Why are you going to another conference? It's almost that blinding flash of the obvious, but I think what drives that for people is you do develop a kind of a comfort zone once you conquer something.
Yeah.
And there is a risk of lagging into the comfort zone.
It's easy. It's if you're, the excuse is you're tired, or whatever the excuse is, it's just an excuse. And I finally hit a point at age when I know I've documented everything. I know this sounds crazy, but I know at age 30, I had to get to be a better CEO. I became a better CEO at age 40. So I knew if I studied hard for 10 years, because I already knew I cared about people. I already knew John Maxwell is one of my idols. So servant leadership is how I led. And so I already had all that. I knew that. I knew I could raise money, but I wanted to be the best CEO. And not the best CEO. I wanted to be the best CEO in town. And we had some big companies here, Caterpillar and others, like I mentioned. And I wanted to be the best CEO in town, not just as a nonprofit. And that's what I was striving to do.
It's funny you mentioned John Maxwell. I follow him as well, and you talked about talking to Harrington on the way out of a conference. I went to one of John's big conferences over in Orlando a number of years ago, and of course, John's kind of the mystical force of those conferences, and you wait with great anticipation for him to take the stage and do his thing, and so that had all happened, and we were on a break going into other conferences, other workshops, and I go in the men's room at the hotel there. There's John.
That's funny.
And we kind of did this awkward, nope, not going to do that,
Right.
shaking hands, and but which we didn't, but we had a laugh about that, and then there was just this, this magical moment of that oddity, that funny twist in circumstance that made a connection, and kind of for the rest of the conference, for all the thousands that were there, if he saw me in the crowd, he gave me kind of this special nod.
Yeah, that's funny. And John he talks of his new book, but he talks a lot about high road leadership. And I always felt like, and I was with John a couple months ago, and as he was discussing this high road leadership, I always thought, you know what? I think that's what I was always striving to be, is that high road leader. I love my community. I think everybody should take care of the community they live in, and John preaches that, and that's why I always loved him.
Yeah, great work. Well, Matt, I think this has been really valuable, and thank you for sitting in and doing this. Tell folks the best way to get a hold of you.
Well, you can go to themattgeorge.com, and I'm on every social media platform there is. My new company's Big Brand Ventures with Kevin Harrington and Brandon T. Adams and others. And at Big Brand Ventures, we have a philanthropic arm. And in that arm, what my goal is to take nonprofits and show them that they are a business, not a nonprofit. You don't have to have your hand out all the time. If you run it like a business, you can scale, you can raise more money, you can be a brand and a force in your community. And that's one of my goals. And so I appreciate Doug having me on the show. When I'm going to share this with everybody, because I think you're one of the legendary guys in this realm of podcasting, and there's a million people out there doing it, but you do it really well. So I appreciate it, and thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thank you, Matt. Those are kind words, and I really appreciate it. And as I've also not ashamed to say, this is very much a passion project of mine. I just love bringing great guests like you onto the show, where we can have these honest, candid, not cheesy, not inflammatory discussions. Just really get down to hopefully creating some value for some people and giving people ideas on what they need to do to stand up in that leadership gap, because Lord knows we need leaders in this world right now.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I agree with you 100%.
So, well, again, one last time, thanks, Matt. Really appreciate you sitting in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
And folks, this is a part of the show. I do like to remind you, if you're listening on your favorite streaming service, we do have a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership, powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. Let us know what you think and what's going on. Give us any recommendations you've got for other ideas, other guests. Maybe you would like to be a guest. Happy to entertain that thought, and look forward to seeing you there. But for now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye. Go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.